time here. Okay, greetings everybody, and welcome to the first PLP Pathways webinar of the 2018-2019 school year. My camera is not working today, but I'm Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and I would like to have the contributors to PLP Pathways introduce themselves. Before they do that, I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Education for supporting this work. We're a teacher-driven platform designed to help educators across Vermont implementing Act 77. And our PLP Pathways contributors this year are...
Hi, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5'8" journalist in Swift House at Wilson Central School.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hallman. I'm program director at Up for Learning and formerly a middle school teacher.
Hi, I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South Supervisory Union, and also a former middle level teacher.
Hi, I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach on the Alpha team. I'm a middle level generalist at Shelburne Community School.
All right, so our webinar series is designed to sort of span the arc of implementing personalized learning. This is our 4th season, and there are some changes that viewers may notice this year. First of all, we're really going to try and focus on having a theme or a topic for each of our webinars. Today's topic is the nuts and bolts of starting the year, building student identity and affiliation with an emphasis on relationship building, also maybe developing plans for integrated personalized learning into the curriculum, and talking about where folks are in the calendar. And this idea of affiliation and building relationships with students and how important that is, we really want to focus on that. Also, there's a new format for the series. We're going to start with a part 1, which is the what, the theory that's connected to the best practices. Part 2, hopefully we're going to be featuring guests and practitioners from the field. Part 3 will be a sharing of ideas. And then part 4 will be a question and answer from the field from practitioners around the state of Vermont. And then we'll have an announcement and closing. We also want to introduce the idea that by watching the webinar, you're going to be able to get 1 professional development hour, and that will be available through the PLP Pathways webinar. And you just have to answer a few simple questions about the content, and then you will receive a certificate that will be emailed to you from PLP Pathways, and you can build your professional learning through that. Also, we're going to, this year, after each webinar, we're going to have a sort of a note page that we're going to distribute that has resources or ideas that we may bring up in conversation. We'll distribute that through our social media platforms and our website. And that way, if you hear something or you want to go back and look at and explore those resources, we'll have those available to you. For all those teachers out there, we hope that you are off to a great start, all those educators, curriculum directors, principals, and superintendents. And here we are. We're going to get going. And Lindsay Hallman is going to introduce part 1, which is the what. Lindsay?
Thanks. So before we can really talk about the actual practice and what we're doing in our classrooms and hear from others in the field, it's really important to ground ourselves in why we do this, the theory and the rationale. And so why identity work, why relationship building, something that's extremely important throughout the entire year, but is foundational to building the learning community that feels safe and supportive and nurturing for all of our learners. So I want to start with a quote. This is a quote by Dr. James Comer. And he said, "No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship." And I think that that really gets at the core that as human beings, we all have a basic need to feel love and belonging. And if each of our young adolescents don't have at least 1 significant relationship, then they don't feel that affiliation, that sense of a belonging. And then the learning, they can't access the learning tools that they need. So another piece that Don did not mention that I am excited to mention is that on our PLP Pathways YouTube channel, we have short videos with different folks from the field talking about these topics. And Mary Jackman Sullivan has a video. It's short, it's 4 minutes, but She's a professor emeritus at UVM and a longtime middle-level educator. And she was interviewed, and the first question that was asked is, what would it look like and sound like if if relationships were a focus of the middle-level experience? And she said it'd feel happy, joyful, people would feel safe, and that every youth would have at least one adult that they felt connected to, and they'd enjoy coming to school. And I think that's our ultimate goal, is providing a joyful experience. She also said, more than, it's not just about math, it's not about the teacher, it's not even about lunch, it's about the friendships for our young adolescents. And feeling a sense of belonging and having positive relationships is the number one reason that youth come to school every day. They're not necessarily, they might be coming to school because they're really psyched to work on a math project or their PLP, or have breakfast for lunch in the cafeteria, but they're really coming because they're affiliated and they want to see the folks that they care about and provide them that sense of belonging. The need for relationships is really fundamental because it allows our youth to develop a strong self-concept. And this is during a time when they strongly need independence from adults. So they're kind of wavering between wanting to be, still reliant on adults, but also wanting their independence. And being able to take risks in a safe environment allows them to develop a deeper sense of self. Mary also talks about this idea of how can we connect the relationships, what's the connection between relationships and personalization. And I think she really said it best when she said that stronger relationships make you more open to taking risks. And when we are working towards a more personalized learning environment and providing learners with these opportunities, we want them to be able to take risks. And that's the only way that we're going to support them in having a better sense of self, more confidence, and a stronger place in their community. And I think as adults, one piece that's really important is that we do our own work on our own identity and understanding who we are and what we bring to the classroom every day, and understanding our own implicit bias and trying to, really work on that as an adult leader in the classroom. And that if we can take off, I always think of it as a mask, if we can take off our own mask and really show that we are vulnerable, that we have those same needs of love and belonging, then those relationships become much deeper. Two other pieces that Mary hit on, and then we can switch to something a little more interactive here. But one of the pieces in relationship building that she talks about is deeply listening and being a good listener. And I know as educators, we are being pulled in so many directions, and we have a line of 3 people that want to ask us something and borrow something and wonder something. And I think it's really practicing as an adult facilitator how to deeply listen to our young adolescents so that we can be really responsive to their needs. And Mary also references an article she wrote, which I'm hoping we can put that on our notes page, and I'm sure we can at the end of this webinar. But the title of it was "Effective is Not Affective." And this concept that you can be an effective teacher, yes, certainly, but the affective piece is what is going to move students forward as human beings so that they feel confident to walk their path from young adolescence into adulthood and have a greater sense of self. So I really, really pulled a lot of my piece, the what, from what Mary had to say, because she said it so beautifully. And I'm hoping we can link that article, "Effective is Not Affective," written by Mary, to our notes page. So that's just this piece of our webinar, the what, we felt was really important in grounding folks in why we're talking about this. And now we're going to turn it over to Maura, who's going to talk about this topic in practice. And our guests from the field, everyone, we have Don and Kevin and Meg, and we're hoping that in the future we will have other guests that will join us. And so we're looking for guests. And at the end of the webinar, we'll tell you what the next topic is. And then you can reach out to one of us and let us know if you're interested in being a guest on our webinar. Laura, this is your.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So, you know, thinking about our practitioners in the field and your experiences in the classroom, can you talk to us a little bit about what the significance is of supporting young adults in exploring their identities or their sense of self in concert with creating a supportive and nurturing learning community? And sort of within that, thinking about why is this so important at the middle level specifically? So, Meg, would you sort of give your perspective of why it's so significant that we really spend this time to support and nurture our adolescents?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You want me to start?
Yeah.
Sure. You know, I'm just reflecting, you know, it's Thursday afternoon, and I'm just sort of going back over the week about how we're trying to be intentional about building and scaffolding these ideas around identity. I think one of the things that's a little tricky is coming on too hot with the kids about it. Like if we come in too strong with, what are your core values and what do you believe, that sometimes it gets, they don't see the connection. So we have just been trying to sort of softly roll out some activities that help kids get a sense of identity and why it's important, even just in our process of building curriculum with kids around self and world questions. We're looking at when we ask those deep, thought-provoking questions, and we can connect with other people around the room who have the same questions. Those are ways that we build connection, and we have these questions that we think are unique to ourselves, and yet really they're more common. So I think we're trying to intentionally help kids see the balance between the things that I worry about or wonder about as an individual have a place in my community, and I feel connected to that. So I think we just did that today with our world questions, and it was so powerful to hear what these kids are wrestling with or wondering about.
Can I follow up? Because I think you touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but why is it so important that you take time as the teacher to build those relationships with kids? Like, why is that so important? And why is that a critical element to successful middle level programming?
Well, I just think because, you know, it's much of what Lindsay was already identifying, is that we are at this unique age for these kids. They're just beginning to identify that they have this role in their larger community. It's not to say that they didn't have that in second and third and fourth and fifth grade, but their capacity for seeing themselves as change agents, for seeing themselves as drivers of their learning. Sometimes they don't always get that invitation. So by providing that invitation, we're honoring that this is where you're at in your life. You don't have it all figured out, but you have a lot that you're bringing and offering to the learning process. We need your voice. We need to hear you. We need learning to be meaningful and relevant to you. So I think that's a part of it.
Yeah. Kevin, in your experience, why do you think it's so important to start with building relationships and creating spaces for students to explore their identities and their sense of self?
Yeah, I think especially at at this level, so, the 5th through 8th grade, developmentally, these kids are really starting to take more notice of what's going on around them, and making those connections about what they're doing and how it's influencing people around them and how just they're connecting. So I think, with that, we really try to drive at this level, this idea of identity and personalization, how everything works together. These kids have to advocate for themselves, and in order to do that, you have to go through and build these relationships to help them. Like, I love that. I'm just like looking over the notes. I was just writing down that Meg just said the capacity for them seeing themselves as they can make change. And I think for us, it's at this level, that developmental level, where we really start getting traction with students being able to really advocate for themselves. And in order to advocate for yourself, you really have to have a clear understanding of who you are as a person. And going back to what Lindsay was saying, in order to get to that point, kids have to be willing to take healthy risks in your environment. They have to be willing to make mistakes and put themselves out there. And that ties into the relationships piece. And if they feel like, they can trust you, if they feel like they can trust the environment they're in, then they're going to start, breaking down some of those barriers that they might have. And especially, anybody who works with 6th, 7th, 8th graders, they're starting to be like, oh, what do people think of me, right? So if they're trusting the environment around them, they're able to say, okay, this is who I really believe I am. Then you can lay the groundwork with some of these bigger pieces.
Don, I'm curious, when we think about the start of the year, we always talk about the importance of building relationships and creating spaces for kids to talk about identity. Why is that so important, especially when thinking about launching the personal learning framework? Like, why is it so important that we start there when we seek to, move through this framework across the year?
Well, I always, I'm just, again, reflecting on what folks are saying, but I always look at it as getting to know my students really well so that I can start developing pathways for them for success, so that I can start seeing what they're good at, what their interests are, and I can start relating to them in a way that makes them feel like they do belong. So when I have kids tell me that during the summer, they were fishing, or they spent time with family, or they canoed, or they camped, or they read, or whatever they're doing, that's sort of a way in of learning more about their interests. And I think as soon as you learn about the kids' interests, you can begin engaging them in conversations, and you can begin engaging them in the classroom. And that goes to this sense of affiliation that Lindsay mentioned at the outset. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like it's so powerful. Just a quick experience. First of all, we start with this relationship web that I've talked about for a long time, where we have kids just sketch out their different relationships that they have, from their family to the groups and the teams that they're a part of. And I think what that does too is that's how we get into the principles and values, and where we start asking kids, what's important to you, and who did you learn that from? And we were talking the other day, I was in a small group, and we were talking about relationships, and we were talking about this idea of kids being treated fairly. And we're talking about immigration, but we're also talking about sense of justice, and whether kids are getting treated fairly and equally across the board. And a lot of kids recognize that they are not getting treated equally, and they have something to say about that. And as citizens, we're talking to them about, what influences how you are performing at school, or how you're a part of the school community. And these kids were just so emphatic about the power of relationships, that even if they didn't like the subject, but they liked the teacher, they would be willing to try as hard as they could. And at the same time, they were also saying that if they don't have a good relationship with that teacher, they might not try their hardest. You know what I mean? And how important that relationship. And I felt that when a kid says, a teacher doesn't like me, okay, that is so huge, because the kid stops learning, right? They start to say, it's not about the subject, it's not about the topic, it's about my relationship with this person. And if that's not good, then you have more obstacles to overcome. Mm-hmm. And I think also that starting with the relationship web and looking at principles and values and finding out what kids like to do in their identity, I think that allows you to start building those relationships. And more, the more I talk about it, the more I talk to kids about it, the more I understand how critical that is for kids' success, and especially for kids who might not have a huge relationship or network outside of school. Like some of our most at-risk kids are lacking in those strong relationships, which is why I think it's so critical to work on them.
I think, just going back to what you were saying about, it's also what we know about the brain, right? This is, as much as we're talking about, getting kids ready so that we can talk about goal setting or getting kids ready, unless the brain feels safe, our learners aren't available, and our learners aren't going to be available until we create those spaces where they feel nurtured. And we started with the heart, and we really are creating these joyful spaces that the brain is feeling like, okay, I'm good here. I can, I'm going to fully function, and I'm ready to learn. And so I think, as much as it's about personalization, it's about getting our learners ready to learn, right? And so I think you really spoke to that too. And I think it's very common. I think we've all had experiences where kids have said, oh, that teacher doesn't like me, or you don't understand. And I think that's a very common narrative for our young adolescents. And so, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. So we've talked a little bit about some of the theory and the why behind this stuff. Do we want to jump into talking about, so how do we do it? So we know it's important. We've sort of, shared our perspectives. So I'm wondering if we want to go into the practice, into sharing our ideas. Does that sound okay?
I think that sounds great.
Yep.
That's great.
So
what are Meg, right?
Go ahead, Meg.
What's that, Linz?
Meg,
okay. No, I was just gonna put it out there to say, what are some of those, more concrete ways that you are both looking at developing those strong relationships with your kids? Like, what are the the teacher moves, I guess, that you're doing to build those relationships? And if that's tied in with the identity work, Don, you just sort of gave that example, but what are some of those nuts and bolts that people are doing to establish those strong relationships, building that community and doing the identity work? So let's start with the community part first, maybe. Anyone want to jump in?
I can jump in.
Awesome.
So I think one of the most powerful pieces is having some structure in the schedule, whether it's called advisory, the circle of power and respect, CPR, TA, whatever it's called.
If you are going on the late bus, the bus is pulling in right now. You need to get out there. Thank you.
Sorry.
Come on, kids.
Sorry about
that. So I think whatever it's called, and in whatever time frame in the master schedule it can happen. If it's every day, that's amazing. If it's not every day, that's just as good. But having a time where it's not about academics, and that they have a chance to sit in a circle and see each other for who they are and break down the walls and do different activities that are, both allowing them to take safe risks, but also exploring who they are at the same time. I think of it like in concert with getting to know one another. And I think, whether that's 5 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, whatever it is, it's a fundamental part of middle level philosophy, is having a time and a space for relationship building and connections and that affective piece. But it's also the affective, the social emotional is so connected to all the other parts of learning. So just like Maura was saying, I think it was Maura was saying, thank you, with the brain, that, if they don't have that piece, if that's not happening, the other piece, they're not available for the other pieces. So I think it also allows each of the young people to see each other in a whole different way. This is not just Lindsay in science class and Lindsay in humanities, but this is Lindsay.
Right. Kat, do you want to jump in and share some of your community building?
Yeah, absolutely. Just piggybacking off what Lindsay was saying, I think most importantly is we hear too often, there's not enough time for all this, plus the work we have to do with keeping up with the curriculum. And I think you just have to be at a point where you make time for it. If it's not in your schedule, especially the first 2 weeks are so important, if you have new students or just kind of seeing those same students and just rebuilding relationships or making new relationships, you really have to grab them early. So I think it's just pertinent that you make time in the schedule for it. And I always joke with my colleagues, and when we hear that, people are saying, oh, we don't have enough time because I have X, Y, and Z with the curriculum. Like, is the first 2 weeks of this fifth grader's curriculum going on their college transcript? No, but will these first 2 weeks of relationship building make a lasting impact for our next 4 years? Yeah. So, when you kind of take a step back and look at it through that perspective and through that lens, it makes it easier to let go of, that extra math class or that extra science or social studies class. Now, that's one thing just as a team we embrace, where we, our first 2 weeks, we just set aside time, starting as early as we all come in a couple days before school starts for our Hopes and Dreams conference with our new fifth graders. And that's kind of how we get everybody from the start. We bring in those fifth graders and their families before anybody else even comes in to welcome them. And then we have a mentor-mentee breakfast. Again, the day before our entire student body comes in. That's our 7th and 8th grade mentors come in, have a little breakfast and meet up with their new mentees, our fifth graders, show them around. We have some structured activities and some time built in that's pretty fun for them. And then, we hit the ground running. The first day of school, we're doing things like Don said with the relationship webs and doing different identity work and just with team time. Like, we don't really start any of our social studies, literature, writing classes until end of the second week of school, because we're doing so much as team building and team activities and really giving these kids a chance to laugh and have fun and be together and again build those relationships. And for us, it's made a profound impact on how the rest of the year goes. So I think just coming back to that, you have to make time for it. And I know we wrote a blog recently about some of the different activities that we do on Swift. So I'm not going to go through all those, but there's just a ton of different things, as informal as just getting outside playing a game, and more formal like the sit down with the Hopes and Dreams conference, where you're looking at strengths and challenges and just like kind of getting to know you, like what are your interests and hobbies. So there's a whole gamut of ways you can start building these relationships and building your community for your whole learning team.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Don, do you want to share some specific ways that you at Main Street have done that community building?
Well, I think I'm sometimes not the best at sort of these community building, like the games, but I'm trying. Like and we're doing a teachers advisory. I'm doing a lot with that. And we're doing the Circle of Power and Respect, which has started out really well this year. But I think, and I do also want to emphasize, Kevin's blog is an excellent inroads, or it gives excellent insight to some of these more developed activities, which are amazing for kids. But for me, I think the challenge that I'm looking for is, how do I get to know the kids in the context of also developing the sense of team and this sense of expectation? Because I have these huge expectations for kids, and I need them to know that we're going to meet those expectations together in like an organized way. And so I hear like Kevin is making this great point about how, we need to slow down and give kids time to get to know each other and to really sort of take that time to build those relationships. But I also think that as I'm doing that, I'm also really trying to gain insight into the kids' strengths and challenges as a student. I'm thinking and watching them very carefully, like I'm observing kids. And the way that I do that is through this biography that we write typically for all my new kids coming in. We do a brainstorming and some creative writing prompts where I get to see what they're thinking and how they think about school and their dispositions. We do that relationship web. And then once I have that relationship web and I have some creative writing or some exploratory writing, we move into this biography, and then we set up our PLP. And through that process, I'm starting to really get to know the kids, their creativity. I'm getting to know how they write. I'm getting to know how they think about themselves. I'm getting to know all these different aspects of the child, which I think is going to help make our team stronger. And so I kind of look at it as, how do I get to know the kids and build these relationships at the same time I'm building the structure around them that's going to allow them to feel supported, and that's going to allow them to feel like they're in a safe space where they can address those strengths and challenges in a way that's going to be engaging and meaningful. And so I'm always looking for this holy grail of getting them up to speed while at the same time building these great relationships, but creating a sense of team and affiliation so that we can really create a positive learning environment and, making it equitable for all kids as well. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just one way that we kind of look at building those relationships and community.
Right. No, I think that's critical. I think I was just thinking about some of the ways that Alpha we work to build that community piece, that affiliation part. So similar to what Kevin has said, like I won't, I think there's two that stand out to me, and one is the 8th grade retreat. So on the 3rd day of school, we take because we're a multi-age team, we take our 8th graders off-site and just do some team building with them to really emphasize their role as 8th graders in this upcoming year. They have a big responsibility. They have to help to set the stage for the year. We kind of ask them that question of what do you want your legacy to be before, you have this year now as an 8th grader, and what do you want your legacy to be before you graduate in June? And that sets them up then to do our team-wide orientation, where again, we go off-site, we go to Shelburne Beach, and the 8th graders build these stations, which are built around the key components of Alpha that they've identified. So whether it's trust or community or problem solving, and the 6th and 7th graders rotate through those stations. And then the 7th graders have the job of building these like whole team games that everyone participates in. And inevitably, kids come away from that with, I didn't know that. I didn't know that other kid. We have our prime groups, but we don't always get to know other kids that are on the team. There's 80 of us. So it's, that's a lot of people to get to know. And I just, whatever the future brings for teaming, I just hope that will be that opportunity to just have the kids come together in some way that's run by kids, where kids are running the activities in the stations, because it empowers them to be leaders and also sets the tone for efficacy. We can pull off an event and we can support each other through these different activities. So I think our second, do you want to say something, Lynn?
I was going to add one more thing. I was just thinking, building off of what you said and Kevin and Don, but really it's really for me, what I learned over my years with middle schoolers is that we always started our year with also, as Kevin said, it's community building, and it came in a variety of forms, whether it was, getting people prepared and ready and doing that in a community building way, but also just being together and trying new things and problem solving and taking risks. And we always started our year, because we were also multi-age, with a mountain hike. And we would learn so much about one another, just hiking a mountain, doing a day trip, hiking up to Sterling Pond. And some kids who had never hiked a mountain before, who thought they couldn't do it, and maybe they were like, I'm not doing this. The cheers and the support that their peers gave them, what has always just been one of my highlights. And then we always ended our year, because we were multi-age, with a trip at Hobart Outdoor Center, and it was 2 nights and 3 days. And I've had the opportunity to do retrospective, some interviews about the Edge Academy experience with past Edge Academy learners. And so some of them are in their 20s, and some of them in their early 20s, and some of them are the youngest group would be freshmen now. And when I asked them, what sticks with them from their experience with the Edge and being a member of the Edge Academy, every single person that I spoke to said Hobart Outdoor Center, the experience we had there, we became a family. And we learned so much about one another. We, started to see different people in different ways. And it was something that they will never forget.
Can I jump in? I'm so sorry about my internet connection. I'm on a different connection, so I'm hoping I'm good now. But I think one of the key things that, I think we're all senses is this importance of like the power of play and intentional play. And that's how we play with our adolescents, in a sense, is creating these spaces that we're intentionally playing alongside them. Like, that's what I think is so special about those days, is that you're playing alongside your students. And as you were saying before, Lindsay, like, they're seeing your authentic self. And you need to be your authentic self in front of kids, I really believe. And it's also, they're looking at how you have a relationship with your teaching partners. Like, we need to be really conscious modelers of how we celebrate a teaching partner's success in front of kids, or say, are you okay? Can I support you? Like, they're watching, and we're teaching them how to form relationships with each other and in their lives, and be those models. And so I think as much as it's about us building relationships with kids so that they're safe, we also have to model how we build relationships just as humans, because it's one of those, it's a basic need, but I think it does come to that, playing alongside your kids. And that also, when I think about TA, that's the power of using a circles protocol, or, we did responsive classroom developmental designs. Like, you're playing with your kids. So you're breaking down those barriers and you're creating those safe spaces. So those are just some things that were coming through my head.
And that's so funny, Maura, because we had a student today who said, do you guys like hang out after school and stuff? Like, do you go out on the weekends? And I was like, well, no, we don't do what Kev does, but we do spend a lot of time together. And you're exactly right. Like, that's such a critical part of doing the work cohesively. I think it does matter.
I was just going to say, I had students used to ask me if my teammate and I were BFFs. And I was like, well, so that always like warmed my heart, because that really, demonstrates that modeling that Maura was just talking about, that like, just being yourself with another human being and supporting them, and they are watching. So that's a thing. That's the other part that you were just mentioning, is like, they're watching really closely as we're modeling what it's like to be an adult in this world.
Right.
Can I just jump in there? I thought Meg brought up something that was really important, was this idea of efficacy and trusting kids to build things, both real hands-on things, but also these ideas of teamwork. And I think this idea of efficacy, and we also mentioned earlier agency, anything you can do to make kids feel like they can accomplish things. I think those efficacy and agency are so closely linked together, and that developing experiences for kids to have a chance at that, I think, is really critical.
I'm not sure what our time frame exactly is, but there was one other component about the practice around. So how does this work inform the PLPs or link to the PLPs? And I was wondering if anyone wanted to sort of talk about that. I think some of our questions from the fields might be asking that too, but maybe we can just share what that link is between, okay, you're doing this identity work, or you're doing this affiliation stuff. How does that connect with the PLP? Does anyone want to start with that? Kev, do you want to? I'm looking at you.
Yeah. I can't tell who you're looking at. Sorry.
Sorry, I know you can't tell.
Yeah, I can start with that. Well, I think just coming back to what we've been saying, all these pieces that you're doing the first couple of weeks of school, first couple of days of school, just making the time and that kind of mutual play that Maura was talking about. You're creating the safe space for students to start doing that groundwork of thinking about who they are as a person and learning about each other too. And I think if they feel comfortable, about seeing their true authentic self, because like Lindsay was saying, we're modeling that ourselves. So within those first couple of weeks, like, we're kind of setting the foundation. We're giving them the space to start doing this work. So that, to me, lends itself to like a perfect dovetail of some of the things Don was talking about, the ways that he really starts establishing these relationships and getting those kids, which is doing like your identity work, either in your advisory groups or your core groups. and doing things like relationship web and writing up the bios that go on your PLP. So the PLP, I feel like, kind of takes form as this is all happening. And that's such a cool thing to do, because we do, and I think it's our second or third day of school is when we kind of launch the kids, launch our PLP and have the kids start making their PLP sites. And it's as they're kind of doing this identity work. So it's, you know, their PLP sites taking on its own identity at the same time, which is a really neat thing to watch. And it does, it just provides these students with a chance to just seeing like, wow, this is who I am right now. This is what my principles and values are, who I think I am as a person and as a learner. And then we just kind of go through that PLP process, which is, you know, at the core, it's what do they want? Like, what do they want to achieve? And in order for them to understand that, they have to have a really good idea of who they are. So, you know, going back to some of the things that we do, it's, you know, it's every year we do something different for identity. And this year was like a coat of arms, and we used the, you know, 5 different efficacies for that as prompts. And, you know, made their coat of arms and put their picture on it and drew on it. And that kind of launched into our identity page on the PLP. And that was the first thing that they put on there. So they like each immediately had something that was valuable to them that they put on their PLP sites. And then, you know, from there, we kind of did the relationship webs, and we started launching, you know, obviously into the goals later on, but it just gives everybody that starting point of like, okay, this is why the PLP is important, because it's about me. About me page is you.
Can I chime in too? I think that because you just hit upon all of that, why it's so the connection there. I really truly believe that we are at like a point in our Vermont education world where we have a huge opportunity to have the PLP be an extremely engaging part of a learner's experience, or it just becomes a checkbox. And I think what you just hit upon, Kevin, is the reason why it can be so engaging and so important and supportive for each individual. And it has to start right from the beginning. So everything we're doing in the beginning is all about who are we and how do we fit into this community. And starting the year with all the different activities that everyone has already talked about. I know that it always changed, just like Kevin said. We always did some sort of identity project. And through that identity project, we were setting up all these other different structures for how other things would work throughout the year. So we were teaching how to do a project, and we were teaching how to create, you know, a personal narrative, and we were teaching elements of writing, and everything was integrated, but it was really engaging because it was about them. And it also was the core of their PLP. And it wasn't something that we picked up in October right before student conferences and said, we got to set some goals. It was from the ground. As soon as, you know, it was from day one, because we were doing all this work around who are we and how do I fit into this community? And then those pieces become the fundamental foundation of the PLP. And I think that this is like the critical point for us as educators and you know, that are working with the personalized learning plans and Act 77, is that we are at a critical point where it either becomes a checkbox and we pull it out in October and then we put it away until April, or we use it as an integrated part to engage our learners.
And Lindsay, I know that we're running a little bit short on time for this section, but I just want to support everything you just said. And this year we're doing an art project. It's called the Personal Learning Wheel. And what we're doing is we're taking elements of phenology. So we're thinking about how the world is changing and also the patterns of our lives. And the kids are doing this art identity project, which is going to go onto their PLP. And it's also going to be put into an art show kind of deal. But what you just mentioned is so critical. Once you have a kid who has created either a shield, like Kevin mentioned, or a personal learning wheel, you can use that to write memoirs, to write narratives, to write how-tos. That gives you this in for literacy. And I think you start with the child, but then you can have them branch out into all these different things that we want them to think about: citizenship and rights and responsibilities. That all stems from either the questions they have about the world or who they are as a person. And each of those kids is different, right? So the PLP becomes the one place, the kind of where you can meet that kid and say, what's the evidence? What do you have? Who are you? What does it look like? And by providing them with those activities, I think the literacy, the transferable skills, that starts to fall into place. But it's engaging them with ways for them to express who they are and who they want to be in that safe learning space that's so important. So I thought that's just so critical, and thank you for articulating that.
Sure. We're going to go now to Kevin, who has some questions from practitioners in the field.
Yeah, and this is
a new segment of our PLP Pathways that we're super excited about.
Yeah, this is actually a great segue too. So Kyle Chadburn from Orleans had a question. How do you start the conversations about core values and engage students in reflection on that topic? So I know we've talked about kind of setting the stage there. So now we can get right into how are we starting these conversations with students? What's that look like?
I can jump in. So I think, we start the conversations by building the relationship and talking about, creating a safe space for students to really think about their identity and their values. I used the Flying Ryan Decisions program. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Flying Ryan organization, but it's an organization, it's a legacy organization, and part of what they do is they have a whole process for helping kids to identify their core values to guide their lives. And it's a really wonderful way to also honor the life of Ryan Hawks. And so that was something that I used within my programming to structure how we talked about our values. And our students would turn their values into movies using, some of their own photos and stuff. And that's how we always started our student-led conferences too. And to see the parents watch their children talking about their core values or the things that that guide their lives, it can be a very emotional, but also incredibly positive conversation. And so I can add that into our notes that we follow up a link to the Flying Ryan organization and the Decisions program. But that's how I used to structure our conversations about our values.
I can share a little bit. We sort of did a softer rollout first, where we just had the kids come up with headlines that reflected their summer learning, and we kind of talked about making sure that it was linked to some sort of personal learning. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, the family learned that you can't forget to, I don't know, feed the dog or whatever. It was more like, what's a personal learning experience that you had this summer that you could create a headline? And when we started to share those experiences, we started to just voice, what do you think someone might value as a result of that? Or what do you see that's common that we all prioritize a little bit? And then we just continue to try to be transparent about whether it's in our self and world question process, whether it's in our identity wheel. We're trying to build up towards these ideas. What is it that we value? And so we didn't come out too strong with it right out of the gates, but we're just trying to, again, build the relationships, build the experiences so that they can start to get to that. And then we will go to the Flying Ryan resources. So it's just a scaffold there a little bit.
Lindsay or Don, want to add anything?
I just, I'll just go back to that relationship web when we start. What we do is we have the kids build that web, and then I ask them to do a reflection about their strongest relationships, their strongest positive relationships, because we always want to keep it positive. And then once they've identified those positive relationships, I ask them to identify traits of that relationship or things they value about it. So they end up with a list of 15 to 20 traits. It could be humor, it could be caring, supportive, it could be, friend, all these different character traits. And then I have them pick out the 3 or 4 most important to them. And then we do a little structured writing where they say, okay, honesty is one of the most important. And then they explain what honesty is to them. and why it's important. And then that goes on the principles and values page of their PLP. And one of the things too that you can do later on is you can always go back to these and say, have your principles and values changed at all? Are they still the same? Are there events in the school year that have made you question your principles and values? Have you read anything that's changed your mind about principles and values, or that you see reflected in the literature? And so I do it it's pretty concrete. And then once it goes on their PLP, you can always have them reflect back on it. And because I'm also a multi-age program, one of the first things we do with the 8th graders is we have them go back and look and say, hey, have your principles and values changed? And sometimes they have, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty interesting how kids stick with those principles and values. And, you know, it's sort of a nuts and bolts thing, but then you can take that and expand it and apply it to a lot of different elements of our course of study. We're going to be looking at politics this year and the Constitution. And if you're looking at politics today, you know, you ask kids, how are your principles and values reflected in current events, right? Mm-hmm. And it can also become a debate, questions, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice, nice.
Great. So, you know, moving on from this, we have another question from Jared Bailey from Wilson Central School, which is, how do we recommend starting the personalized learning process with the younger students, knowing that Act 77 applies from grade 7 to 12. I know we've heard a ton from, especially middle grades, 6th graders getting involved. I know personally we have 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that all take part in the same process. I know I've talked to 3rd and 4th graders that say, I really want to get on this PLP train and see what we can do with our kids. So wondering what ideas you have about getting those younger grades involved with some of the work that we've shared.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think they're already involved without even knowing, because I think just part of, you know, the best practice is identity work from the beginning. And I feel like, you know, I have a 2nd grader who I feel like that's, you know, she's doing that work in her classroom about who am I? And it's just it's in a different place. But then as far as, you know, who am I? And then helping them really articulate the questions and listening to their curiosities. I think there's ways to, whether it's around a unit or I guess maybe, or a thematic unit piece or a specific subject unit, thinking about their questions, what they're curious about, and then helping them dive into those questions. So that to me is, you know, taking their questions and then supporting them in exploring their curiosities. I think I think as educators, as part of best practice, is asking kids to share their questions and their curiosities instead of just driving the entire experience. So I think there's some natural elements. I would say to Jared, you know, the identity work can easily be transferred to different ages. It just maybe in the questions you ask or the vocabulary that's used through all sorts of different visuals. But then, you know, goal setting is certainly, you know, the concept of goal setting, I feel like that also applies at a young age, that even in, you know, preschool, kids are setting goals, you know, and so supporting them around the language of that learning is probably the most important, because it might not be as accessible, but I think it's already there. I think we do it naturally.
I know, piggybacking off of that, one thing I've noticed, you know, being on a 5th through 8th grade team, the Hopes and Dreams Conference, when we start with those 5th graders, it really comes down to how we're asking those questions and that scaffolding process to get them, you know, to get the wheels turning. Because for a lot of them, this is like their first go at, you know, creating a bigger personalized goal. Like Lindsay, you were saying, kids are always creating goals for themselves. You know, like, I want to tie my shoes by the end of this month or something like that. But this is like really looking at, you know, kind of bigger picture a lot of times, either academic, you know, thinking about the transferables too, like what's applied academically and outside of school. So I think it's how we're probing that and offering examples. One of the biggest things that's helped us is saying, you know, oh, you want to work on something around using different resources to help you solve problems. Here's a couple of goals that some of your classmates have used in the past, and just having them hear them then all of a sudden these fifth graders are like, I like that, but can I use this word instead? And then they're already kind of starting that process of advocating for themselves about, I like how that goal sounds. Here's how I want to make it my own. And that's been such a huge help for us for, again, getting our fifth graders in that process. And then by the time their first, second, trimester conferences come up, they're just hitting the ground running with advocating for themselves and being able to really say, here are the reasons I need this goal still, or here are the reasons why I don't think I need this goal. Here's all my evidences for it. So for me, that's huge.
The time is 4:25. The activity.
Anybody else on helping younger students get involved?
I just want to back up the idea that young kids can set goals. And I worked with a second grade teacher who was actually having her kids set reading goals. And, just simple reading goals, like I want to read a few more pages, or I want to read a few more one more picture book. And so this idea of age appropriate goal setting, keep it really simple. Maybe a kid sets one goal, and I like that idea of using language. And I just want to mention too that Proctor Elementary, I think Corey Smith and Courtney Elliott are doing fantastic work with fourth graders, and they presented last year at the Middle Grades Institute. And if Jared has questions or wants to touch base with them, I can certainly make that connection.
Can I say one? I know that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Elementary teachers, you're doing it. You just might not be thinking about it intentionally. You talk about self-talk with kids all day long. Mm-hmm. You're doing it. It might not go on a platform, but it's just about bringing that intentionality to it. And we have a lot to learn from you. So.
Agree. So we're coming to the end of our webinar, and we're going to close with first talking about what's happening around the state as far as professional development and opportunities for our youth. And then we'll get into kind of what's the topic of the next webinar, remind you about the PD, our credit, where to find that, the notes, resources, and then we'll end with an inspiring quote. So I can start with what's happening. A few things that came to mind for me. On October 3rd, we are holding our third annual Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability for middle-level youth and adult teams. We are at full capacity and really excited, and have folks from all over the state attending and great community partners to support their work. On the 4th of October is new. We're having a day for high school youth and adult teams. And so if anybody out there is a high school teacher, there still is some room. It's a half day as opposed to the full day on the 3rd, but it's a half day for youth and adult teams to come together to think about how the global goals can really drive their learning and their change projects in their own school. I also wanted to share on Up for Learning, my organization that I work for, is offering something new this year. It's called Mastermind Mentors. So this is an opportunity for upper elementary to high school age youth to come to a one-day training with an adult partner and learn about how to learn about key concepts of growth mindset and self-talk, as Maura was just saying. And then you would leave with a toolkit to help facilitate lessons and activities with younger elementary students about how the brain learns. And they'd be mentors to K-3 students. So if anybody's looking for something related to their students' PLP and they're looking for an opportunity, this is a great opportunity, and that's on October 24th. More information can be found at the upforlearning.org website. There's also a great 2-day conference. It's called the Equity Literacy Approach, Becoming a Threat to Inequity in Classrooms and Schools. And I know many people had an opportunity to attend Paul Gorski's conference. It was a one-day in Montpelier, but this is 2 days, and it's sponsored through the Vermont Higher Ed Collaborative. And Paul Gorski, his equity literacy work is really powerful and transformative for educators. And I would highly recommend that experience. And I think by going to that the 1st and 2nd of November, it then kind of allows you to access other opportunities throughout the year with more specific topics. And then finally, my other one before I turn it over to everyone else, the Roland Conference is on October 23rd at UVM. And again, they're bringing back Ruha Benjamin, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who spoke as a keynote last year. And she was brilliant and inspiring. And if anybody has the opportunity to go, I think you will leave inspired. Anything else going on in the field or PD or opportunities for youth?
Sorry, Lindsay, the YES conference is happening on November 2nd, the Youth Environmental Summit, and the UVM 4-H is sponsoring that. There's also the TRY, Teens Reaching Youth, if anybody out there has middle schoolers who want to teach about the environment, and that application deadline is due on November 9th. So that's something to consider. And I just want to throw in a quick reminder as we get near the end here. If you go to the PLP Pathways website and go to the webinar page, you will see a QR code that'll take you to a Google form. And if you fill out the form and if you've watched the video, you can get an hour of professional development for participating. Lindsay?
Yeah, so Don, before we close with a quote, I just was wondering if you could share with our participants what our next topic's going to be and when our next webinar is.
Our next webinar, I believe, is October 18th, I think. Is that correct? Let me just look that up really quickly. And I'm sure that we're going to be talking about goals. And I think that we're also definitely going to be talking about parent communications. And I want to remind folks out there who are listening that even though it's September, almost the end of September, that you may very well want to be considering your parent communications now with regards to conferences. And you may want to be planning backwards from that. So how are you reaching out to parents with regards to PLPs? How are you reaching out to them with regards to goal setting? How are you establishing links to your parents? Because that is a vital part of our programs and supporting kids. And so on October 18th, we'll be talking about goals and parent communications. And we don't want to get there and have people think, oh my gosh, I should have been doing this. So we'll be blogging and tweeting and talking about how you can start developing your goals way in advance of your conferences and using the PLPs to support your work with that.
Yes, and if you'd like to be a guest from the field on our next webinar and want to share your experiences with goal setting or engaging families, reach out to PLP Pathways at gmail.com, correct?
That's correct. And I think that's it for this evening.
Nope, it's not it.
Oh, that's not it. We have a new
closing quote here.
That's a closing quote.
Good.
And also, just Lindsay, don't forget to that we're going to have a notes page that will go out with all these resources, events, and happenings to anybody who's following us. Okay, thanks everybody. And Lindsay?
And our closing quote is by Carla Shalabi, and she wrote a beautiful book called Troublemakers, Lessons in Freedom from Young Children. And to end for our topic for today, the concepts of teaching love and learning freedom are a deeply relational, respectful endeavor that must be threaded into the fabric of a humanistic education. And with that, we end our first webinar.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.